November 8, 1992. Angela Brosso left for an evening bike ride while her boyfriend stayed home baking her birthday cake. She was turning 22 the next day. She never came home. Her headless body was found the following morning. Her killer hid in plain sight for 22 years as a local celebrity called the Zombie Hunter, posing with police officers at festivals, driving a tricked-out cop car. DNA and genetic genealogy finally exposed him. Sunday, November 8, 1992. Phoenix, Arizona. 21-year-old Angela Brosso had every reason to be excited. The next day was her birthday. She and her boyfriend, Joseph Krakowiecki, had recently moved from California to start fresh. They lived in apartment 3115 at the Woodstone Apartments near 24th Avenue and Cactus Road. Angela was a DeVry Institute graduate working at a telecommunications company. Life was looking up. That Sunday evening, around 7 o'clock, Angela grabbed her purple Diamondback Topanga mountain bike. She loved riding the Arizona Canal trails near their apartment. The paths were scenic, especially during golden hour. Joe stayed behind. He had a secret. He was baking her a birthday cake. Joe expected Angela home by 8. They had a routine. Every Sunday night they watched in living color on Fox. They didn't have a VCR, so if one of them missed the show, it was gone. Joe testified in court decades later, "I expected her to be home by 8. 8 o'clock came. No Angela. By 8:30 Joe was worried. He took his bike out, riding the same 15-minute loop Angela would have taken. Nothing. He went out again at 9:30. Still nothing. A third time, just before 11. The canal path remained dark and empty. Joe called Angela's mother in Pennsylvania. No answer. He called a friend. She told him to call the police. Around 11 p.m., Joe reported Angela missing. Officers suggested she might have gone into work early to prepare for an important training class she was scheduled to teach the next morning. But Joe knew better. Her work badge was still in the apartment. The next morning, November 9th, Phoenix police officers Robert Walmsley and his partner were sent on bike patrol around the canal near 25th Avenue and Cactus Road. They'd been told a woman had possibly gone missing in the area. As they rode south along the canal path, they came across something disturbing. Charlotte Pottle was riding her bike that same morning with her young daughter in a child seat. She testified in court years later, "I ended up riding through a puddle of blood, but I wasn't sure what it was at the time." She stopped on her way back, inspecting the paved path more closely. The blood trail led officers up a slight incline to a vacant field just east of the Woodstone Apartments, where Angela lived. What they found was one of the most horrific crime scenes Phoenix detectives had ever encountered. Angela's headless body was discovered in the field. She was naked except for her sneakers. Her body had been so viciously mutilated that investigators initially thought they might be looking for a surgeon or special operations soldier who could commit such precise violence in the dark. Detective Mike Meislish testified about the scene. Medical examiner Philip Keene determined that a stab wound to Angela's back had killed her. But the brutality didn't end there. Her stomach had been slit almost all the way around. Investigators said she had almost been cut in half. She had been sexually assaulted. Her bloodied clothes were found torn from her body, piled nearby. But the most horrifying detail was still to come. Angela's head was nowhere to be found. For 11 days, police searched the canal, the surrounding area, apartment complex dumpsters. Nothing. Then, on November 20th, 1992, a tip came in. A man fishing along the canal spotted something caught on a grate, approximately 2 miles south of where Angela's body had been found. It was her head. When investigators examined it, they noticed something deeply disturbing. The level of decomposition didn't match how long the head could have potentially been in the water, Detective Hillman explained. This led investigators to a chilling conclusion. The killer had likely stored Angela's head in a freezer for days to preserve it before dumping it in the canal. This wasn't just murder. It was calculated, sadistic torture, even after death. Joseph Krakowiecki learned about Angela's death in the most traumatic way possible. The television was on in their apartment as he spoke to police that day, and he saw the murder scene broadcast on news footage. The helicopter actually showed the body. He testified in court 30 years later. Joe would spend the next 22 years living under a cloud of suspicion. There are probably people who, up until last week, swore that I did it, he said in 2015 after an arrest was finally made. He received anonymous death threats, including a phone call on the 20th anniversary of Angela's murder in 2012. Phoenix police traced the call to a Valley payphone but never identified who made it. But Joe had nothing to do with Angela's murder. DNA evidence would eventually prove it. The real killer was still out there. And 10 months later, he would strike again. September 1993, nearly 1 year after Angela Brosso was murdered. Phoenix was about to experience another nightmare. Melanie Bernas was a 17-year-old junior at Arcadia High School. An avid cyclist just like Angela. But her mother, Marlene, had forbidden her from riding along the canal at night after what had happened to Angela Brosso. One evening in September, while her mother was out to dinner, investigators believe Melanie decided to take her bike out for a ride despite the restriction. She came face to face with the same killer who had murdered Angela Brosso 10 months earlier. The next morning, Charlotte Pottle, the same woman who had discovered blood at the Angela Brosso crime scene, was riding her bike with her daughter again. This time near the I-17 underpass at Castles and Coasters. She rode through another pool of blood. Police found Melanie's body in the water. It had drifted about 12 feet before coming to rest in some brush. Drag marks showed where the killer had moved her body and dropped it into the canal. This location was in close proximity to where Angela Brosso's head had been discovered 10 months earlier. The autopsy revealed Melanie had suffered a stab wound to the back that pierced her lung and aorta. She had also been sexually assaulted. There were additional horrifying details. A shallow cut to the neck, and the letters WSC carved into her chest. Investigators would later determine these were the killer's initials, backward. Phoenix police now knew they had a serial killer targeting young women on bikes along the Arizona Canal. The two murders shared disturbing similarities. Both victims were cyclists using the canal paths. Both were attacked from behind with fatal stab wounds to the back. Both were sexually assaulted and mutilated. Both were found near the same section of canal. DNA evidence was collected from both crime scenes. Forensic analysis revealed male DNA that matched between the two murders. Investigators had a suspect profile, but no match in any criminal database. The killer was not in the system. The murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas shook Phoenix to its core. The canal killer, as he became known, had claimed two victims 10 months apart and then seemed to vanish. Years passed with no new leads, no arrests. The case went cold. Phoenix police investigated hundreds of suspects over the years, but none matched the DNA profile. The case that had once dominated headlines faded from public consciousness, filed away in cold case storage while the killer remained free somewhere, possibly still in Phoenix. But in 2012, Detective Sergeant Troy Hillman and his cold case unit decided to take another look at the canal murders. I printed the cases out and they were just massive, almost broke the desk, Hillman recalled. This isn't your typical domestic violence type murder. This was somebody evil. Detectives pored over the files for more than 3 years, looking for any clues they might have missed. We had so many doubters that said, "What are you doing? He's been in the DNA system forever, he's dead, you're wasting your time," Hillman said. The breakthrough came in 2014 when a forensic genealogist approached Hillman about a cutting-edge technique, cross-matching DNA evidence with public ancestry databases. This was before the Golden State Killer case made genetic genealogy famous. The genealogist successfully matched the crime scene DNA with the surname Miller. This narrowed the search from more than 800 potential suspects to just 5 men. Sure enough, Bryan Patrick Miller was in that file, Hillman said. And reading through that file, me personally, the hair stood on the back of my neck. It spoke of a serial killer. Bryan Patrick Miller had a documented history of violence that had somehow been missed. In 1990, at age 17, Miller had been convicted of stabbing a woman named Celeste Bentley. While in juvenile detention, he served time in a halfway house and was released in 1992, just months before Angela Brosso was murdered. But there was something even more disturbing in Miller's file. In May 1992, 6 months before Angela Brosso's murder, a 13-year-old girl named Brandy Myers disappeared while walking near Miller's halfway house. She was never found. Brandy's sister, Kristen Dennis, testified that Brandy was last seen 2 doors down from Bryan's, walking in the direction of his house. Miller lived 1 block from their school and 3 blocks from their home. So every single day we walked right by there, Dennis said. Investigators now had a suspect, but they needed his DNA to prove he was the canal killer. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf came up with an undercover plan. He would meet Miller at a public restaurant, get him to eat and drink, and collect his DNA from the utensils. On January 2, 2015, Schwarzkopf arranged to meet Miller at a Chili's restaurant in Phoenix. Miller was known in the Phoenix area as something of a local celebrity. He attended zombie walks and festivals dressed as a character he called the Zombie Hunter, complete with mask, long trench coat, and fake Gatling gun. He drove a tricked-out old police car and posed for photos with fans and even police officers. "He's hiding in plain sight," Detective Hillman later said. "Just right there, he's taunting us." Schwarzkopf had arranged to be seated in a quiet section of Chili's. Undercover detectives watched restaurant workers take silverware and plates out of the dishwasher, then detectives placed them on the table to ensure they would not be contaminated. To Schwarzkopf's surprise, Miller arrived with his 15-year-old daughter. Miller ordered a hamburger and a glass of water. "He swallows his hamburger in like 5 bites, Schwarzkopf recalled. When Miller finally took a drink, Schwarzkopf knew he had his DNA. But after observing Miller's mild temperament and his rapport with his daughter, Schwarzkopf doubted Miller could be the person responsible for the brutal canal murders. "He's a bigger guy, but he's more soft," the detective said. "Big enough to where he could certainly overpower women, but not someone you'd be really scared of on the street." After the meal, Miller and his daughter left the restaurant. Detectives immediately seized his glass and sent it to the Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab for DNA analysis. 11 days later, on January 13, 2015, the head of the crime lab delivered stunning news to investigators. It was a DNA match to both the Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas crime scenes. "She leans down to me, she goes, 'It's him,'" Schwarzkopf recalled. Miller was arrested later that day, charged with first-degree murder in both Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas' deaths. When a detective told him they had DNA linking him to the canal murder victims, Miller replied, "I don't see how that's possible. I didn't kill anyone." Investigators got a search warrant for Miller's house, where he and his teenage daughter had been living. Schwarzkopf was shocked by the state it was in. "I can remember like it was yesterday, walking up to the front door and everybody going, 'You can't get in that way. It's full of crap,'" Schwarzkopf said. "There was a little pass where you could get to a bathroom in the kitchen and where the TV was, and that's it. Everything else is just stacked to the roof with garbage," said Schwarzkopf. Police also learned disturbing details about Miller's personal life. His ex-wife agreed to testify against him in court. "She told us some troubling stuff about their sex life," Hillman said. "Particularly, he would bring a knife and carve on her and lick the blood. She also said his behavior is what led to their divorce. He began to engage in violent roleplay that disturbed her." Detective Stuart Summers-Ho testified. The case took 8 years to get to trial, delayed by the complexities of investigating a decades-old crime and the COVID-19 pandemic. On October 3, 2022, Bryan Patrick Miller finally faced trial for the murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. Miller made an unusual choice. He waived his right to a jury trial, meaning a judge alone would decide his fate. Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Susanna Cohen would hear the case. Miller's defense strategy was equally unusual. His attorneys admitted he killed both women, but argued he should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Miller's lawyers claimed he suffered from autism spectrum disorder, complex dissociative disorders, PTSD, and other mental illnesses stemming from severe childhood abuse by his mother. They argued that at the time of the murders, Miller was in a dissociative trauma state, unable to comprehend his actions or know they were wrong. The trial was dominated by testimony about Miller's childhood, particularly the abuse he suffered from his mother, who died in 2010. Defense experts offered various diagnoses, arguing Miller had been in the grip of trauma when he killed. But state prosecutors argued Miller was sane at the time of the crimes and committed the murders due to sexual sadism disorder and antisocial personality disorder, neither of which would have left him unable to know his actions were wrong. State prosecutor Vince Imbordino delivered closing arguments, calling the insanity defense nonsense and urging Judge Cohen to focus on the physical facts. "Don't get caught up in the weeds," he told the judge.
After 8 months of testimony, we've reached the end of the trial of the serial killer known as the Zombie Hunter. Prosecutors today wrapped up their closing arguments in the penalty phase.
Bryan Patrick Miller is waiting to learn if he'll be sentenced to life in prison or death for the 1990s canal murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. The decision is now in the hands of the judge. True Crime Arizona's Brianna Whitney's been covering this case for years, and Brianna, this was really the prosecution's last chance to try to sway the judge.
Yeah, after so many months, too. I mean, that's exactly right. Yesterday, we covered the defense's closing remarks. Today, the lead prosecutor not mincing any words when telling the judge that Bryan Patrick Miller deserves to die. And for the first time ever, we saw a piece of evidence today that helped lead to his guilty conviction.
Killing them aroused, planning to kill them aroused him, and he stole the memories that they would have had.
A sexual sadist and manipulator. Words prosecutor Vince Imbordino used in court Thursday to describe Bryan Patrick Miller, the man convicted of the infamous Phoenix Canal murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. Imbordino reminding the judge of some of the most damning evidence against the man who was once known to the public as the Zombie Hunter.
His semen was found inside of these two women. The plan was discovered because his mother turned it into the police.
That plan, we heard about for months, is a document Miller wrote about how he would abduct, sexually assault, and murder a woman, a fantasy he had. For the first time, a picture of the plan was shown in court, the description so graphic, we had to blur the entire piece of paper. And though earlier this week Miller expressed to the judge his remorse for how long this process has gone, something stood out to the prosecution and victims' families.
I didn't hear him say he was remorseful for killing Melanie and Angela. I didn't hear those words.
Miller's defense attorney, R.J. Parker, detailed the abuse from Miller's mother and his mental health struggles throughout the trial, making one final plea to the judge for a life in prison sentence.
I started by saying that Bryan's life was in your hands, and no truer words can be spoken at this moment because they shortly will. Please give meaning to the humanity in everything that you have learned about Bryan.
But the prosecution ending with these words, pointed and poignant.
Angela and Melanie didn't get to choose when they died. They didn't get to choose the day, the hour, the moment. This defendant deserves to know the day, the hour.
The judge will now go over everything she's heard during this penalty phase to decide whether she will sentence Bryan Patrick Miller to death or to life in prison. She told the court today her plan and goal is to deliver that sentence on June 7th, and part of the reason she's waiting is to make sure the victims' families are able to be here for the end of all of this.
It is such a heavy weight on this.
On April 12, 2023, after a 6-month bench trial, Judge Susanna Cohen reached her verdict. Bryan Patrick Miller was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and kidnapping in the deaths of both Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. The judge ruled that Miller was mentally fit and legally sane at the time of the murders. On June 29, 2023, Judge Cohen sentenced Bryan Patrick Miller to death.
The man known as the Canal Killer has now been sentenced to death. Bryan Patrick Miller was found guilty back in April of killing 2 women along the Valley Canals back in the 1990s.
ABC 15's Ashley Holden was in the courtroom when that sentence was read and has more on this decades-long case finally coming to a close.
that the defendant should be sentenced to death.
Those words read after decades of waiting.
The defendant stole her future, her innocence, her life.
The families of both 21-year-old Angela Brosso.
For 30 years now, we've had to live without Melanie because the defendant murdered her.
And 17-year-old Melanie Bernas, both giving powerful statements during the trial, which from start to sentencing lasted 8 months. These families have been waiting since the early 90s when the two women were brutally murdered. Both were cycling when they were killed. Eventually, Bernas's body found here in the Arizona Canal, as well as part of Brosso's. The mystery going cold until people like Troy Hillman started working on the case.
We ended up using forensic genealogy, which was unheard of at the time, groundbreaking technology, and that ended up leading us to Miller.
Eventually, DNA evidence showed the attacks were linked to the same suspect, and Bryan Patrick Miller was arrested in January of 2015. Even then, the trial was years in the making, Miller and his attorneys pleading an insanity defense. But the trial finally started in October. Miller found guilty in April. But Wednesday, the judge laid out how she made the life or death decision, including Miller's age at the times of the murders and alleged abuse from his mom.
The question the court must answer is if the totality of the mitigation is sufficiently substantial to call for leniency. The answer is no.
At one point, it appeared Miller was being comforted by his attorney, but he did end up speaking briefly.
Thanks for listening to everything that was said.
Hillman, who is now retired, able to watch inside the courtroom.
Much delayed justice. So we can never bring those girls back to their families, but we can do our part.
Due to the laws back in 1992, we were told Miller should be able to pick either lethal injection or gas when it comes to his execution. But we are still gathering more information on how his sentence will be carried out. In Phoenix, Ashley Holden, ABC 15, Arizona.